Hello everyone, this is Grace here. In this video, we will be discussing time, place and value of supply chapter 3 GST. So under this video, we will concentrate on time of supply. So this chapter covers discussion on time, place and value of supply. So now we are getting into time of supply. What are the provisions? How is time of supply calculated to know the liability of GSTs? What is payable to the authority? So now let us get into the first slide, time of supply. Section 12 provides time of supply in respect of goods. Section 13 provides time of supply in respect of services. Section 14 provides time of supply when there is change in the rate of tax in respect of goods as well as services. So as we have already learned, what is supply? Supply is nothing but the goods or services which is rendered for a consideration. In some cases without consideration also it can be considered as a supply. So when a supply is made, how is it being calculated? So when based on time. So how is it being treated? So time of supply is the point in time when the liability to pay tax arises. So the time of supply where we take into point at what time the tax is supposed to be paid to the authorities. So time of supply is being defined under section 12, 13 and 14 of CGST Act 2017. So please note down, these are the sections of CGST Act 2017 when the supply of goods, when the time of supply of goods in respect of goods is being made, it comes under section 12. When time of supply in respect of services is made, it comes under section 13. When time of supply is made when there is change in rate of tax in respect of goods as well as services, it comes under section 14. So before we get into detail of time of supply, we need to know about the invoices. So what is an invoice? So as we have already discussed in our previous videos how a GST invoice looks. So let us look into the contents of bill of supply or the invoices. So the content of invoices includes a consecutive serial number in one or multiple series containing alphabets or numerals or special characters, hyphen or dash and slash symbolized as covered with inverted commas, and it can be the combination of alphanumeric as well. So it is the it is the serial number of the invoice. So it will be present in the it will be present in the invoice of the supplier who is giving it. So as we look into this in this slide, invoice number is there with the year of supply, the date as well as the serial number. It can also be an alphanumeric number. Then supplier's name is required. Supplier's name, address and GSTN number is also required. Next, receiver's name, address and GSTIN, that is nothing but the GST number of the receiver also should be mentioned. So the details of the supplier as well as the details of the receiver, the name, the address, the state and the GST number should be mentioned. So next, HSN code of the goods, or for services it is standard accounting code, which is nothing but a service accounting code will be fixed for all the goods which is standardized. So when we look into goods, it is called as HSN number. So if you look into this, HSN for goods, SAC for services. As we know the abbreviation of HSN, harmonized system of nomenclature, which is the code or the serial number for the goods, and service accounting code is the serial number for services which has been rendered. So every product whichever has a description of supply. So the GST regulatory authorities have issued the GST invoices that the invoices should be prepared in this format only. So earlier it was the logo of the company, buyer's name, seller's name, the address of the buyer, and based on their requirements, invoices was prepared. But the GST has issued a detailed invoice format which is to be followed by all the suppliers. So this HSN code for ready-made babies garments, the HSN code is mentioned here, which is 6111200, and the quantity, units, rate per unit, the total, and the taxable discount received, and as well as the taxable value is being calculated here. So now then we need to have information about description of goods and services. Yes, so description is given here, which is ready-made garments. Then value of goods and services after discount, or after discount should be shown. Yes, so after discount, what is the value of goods is also shown, the rate per item, the total, how many, what is the quantity, the discount allowed, and the taxable value is also shown. Then signature or digital signature of the supplier or authorized representative should be mentioned. Yes, here it can be the manual or signature signed by the company's company's owner, or it can be the digital signature, which is digitally signed. So now if you look into here, CGST and SGST is charged. So the this goods has 5% GST, which is charged on this goods, that is ready made baby's garment. So how did I find out it is 5%? Is 2.5%. So here they are paying CGST and SGST. Why is it so? Because ABC is the supplier, where the location or the place of supply is West Bengal, and if you look into the receiver's location is also West Bengal. So as it is intrastate sales which is being made, it intrastate sales should pay CGST and SGST. So that is why the tax is being 5% tax is distributed as CGST and SGST, and it is collected separately. So keeping this invoice, the company, that is the supplier, will collect tax, and he will be liable to pay that tax to the GST authorities, showing the paying CGST and SGST separately. So this is the details of the invoice, which is supposed to be remembered. So next we will have due date for issuance of supply relating to time of supply of goods. So for every supply which is made, an invoice is an important document which acts as a proof for filing up GST. So what is filing up tax returns? So whenever you pay tax, you need to file in the government official website along with the challan number, the challan which you have used to pay. So whenever you pay tax, you will get a serial acknowledgement number. So using that acknowledgement number or the challan what you get, you can link that and pay your taxes automatically. So in GST portal, whenever you have made any supply, you can immediately pay the GST, and the GST will be accounted immediately. So usually when we look into taxes, every tax will have a due date. So for example, if you make sales for the month of April, the due date for it can be it is 15th of May, or sometimes for some cases in some taxes it will be 7th of May. So for the services or for the goods which has been supplied in the month of April, the tax to be paid and filed with the government officials, that is to pay the taxes to the government officials and file the return, in the sense to submit that calculation of the return to the government officials, the due date will be next month. So in order to avoid all this late filing and late payment of taxes, government made this concept where as soon as the services are being rendered or goods are supplied, the invoice is received, whichever is early, the date of payment or the supply of goods or whichever is early, based on that they want all the tax to be collected. The government wants to collect all the tax as early as possible instead of making delay on such imposition of tax or such collection of taxes. So the main element for collection of tax, or to know when the tax is supposed to be paid to the government officials, is through the invoice. So supply involves movement of goods. So for any supply which is made, an invoice is supposed to be issued before the supply is made. Supply is made, that is before the supply is removed out of the warehouse. So it should be such invoices should be given to the recipient or the buyer. If such invoices are not given, it should be the due date for such invoices should be within 30 days. Within 30 days, that invoice should be moved to the recipient. If the invoices are not moved to the recipient, the due date of the issue of the invoice will be accounted as on the date which the recipient collects the goods from the supplier, or the day at which the supplier supplies the goods to the recipient will be considered as due date. So in any other cases, delivery of goods or making goods available to the recipients as such, it is inferred that the date on which goods are delivered to the recipient or the date on which goods are made available to the recipient is the due date of issuance of invoice. Yes, so usually the supplier is supposed to give the invoice to the recipient and collect the taxes. So the date of issue of invoice should be done before the goods are received to the supplier, or within 30 days. 30 days the invoice should be moved to the supplier. Or yeah, if that is not happening, then the supplier can issue the invoice on the day where the goods are moved out of the warehouse, that is on the day where the recipient is buying the goods. So this is the case. So the number of copies required for the issue of invoice is 3 copies usually. So in case of goods, it is 3 copies, where the original will be given to the recipient, the duplicate will be kept with the transporter, and the third copy will be, that is triplicate. The other duplicate copy will be kept by the supplier. This is in case of goods. So as goods are required to be transported from one person to the another, 3 invoices will be fixed. So when service is being rendered, transporters invoices will be deducted. So the original for the recipient and the duplicate with the suppliers. Then only 2 invoices will be maintained in case of services. So these are the details of invoices. So we learned how the invoices are to be maintained and what are the contents of invoices, and when is the due date for issuance of invoice, because based on the due date the date of paying tax will be decided. Then number of copies of invoices were learnt. So now let us get into the concept of time of supply. So as we learned, based on the invoice date the time of supply will be decided. So now let us get into the various time of supply which is decided to pay the tax. So here, as we already discussed in our first slide, time of supply of goods comes under section 12. So that section 12, time of supply of goods, is divided into 4. First one is forward charges. So forward charges will always be from the point of view of the supplier. So as I have already told, government do not want delay in the collection of taxes, as they want it to be collected as early as possible. Everything will be as early the date which is earlier in considering the time of supply. So under forward charges, as I told, it is from the supplier's point. They will look into the earliest of the following, that is the date on which the invoice is issued, or due date of issue of invoice, that is the last date on which invoice is required to be issued under section 31 subsection 1. So what is section 31 subsection 1 of GST Act 2017 is, which describes the time, or states the time at which the tax invoice should be issued by the registered taxable person supplying goods. So this section 31 subsection 1 states when is the supplier supposed to give the taxable invoice to the recipient. Accordingly, the due date of issuance of invoice would be followed. So based on that, the due date for the issuance of invoice will be followed. This section 31 explains what time is the tax invoice issued to the recipient by the supplier. As we discussed, the goods to be moved before the removal of goods from the warehouse is done. The tax invoice should be issued before the goods are received to the or supplied to the recipient, or when the supplier is giving the goods to the recipient. On that day the tax should be the tax invoice should be given to the recipient or the receiver of goods. So this will cover under section 31 subsection 1. So as we discussed under forward charges, the earliest of the following: date of issue of invoice or due date of issue of invoice, date of payment received by the supplier. So when I speak about date of payment, means the earliest of the following, that is the date on which the supplier receives the payment, or date on which payment is entered in the books of accounts of the supplier, or date on which payment is credited to the bank account. So date of payment includes the date at which the supplier has received the payment, or when it is entered in the books of accounts of the supplier. The payment details are entered in the books of supplier, or when the amount is credited to the bank. So among these three, whichever is early will be considered as date of payment received by supplier. Now, among this date, whichever is occurring earlier will be considered as forward charges. Then, if we come into reverse charge is nothing but which concentrates from the point of view of the receiver of goods. So, in reverse charge, earlier of the following will be applicable: date of receipt of goods by the recipient, or date on which the payment is entered in the books of accounts of the recipient, or date on which payment is debited in the bank accounts of the recipient, or date immediately following 30 days from the date of issue of invoice by the supplier. So you need to keep in mind, where the time of supply cannot be ascertained as above, the date of entry in the books of accounts of the recipient shall be the time of supply of goods. So as we discussed under reverse charges, how will the receiver account decide the date of or time of supply? So you will consider whichever is early under these three circumstances. So the first circumstance is the date on which the goods are received will be considered by him as the invoice date, and he will account it as in the books of accounts, or the date of payment as entered in the books of accounts of the recipient, or the date which payment is debited into in his bank account, or when the recipient is paying this amount to the supplier would be considered as the date of date of invoice, or the date immediately following 30 days from the date of issue of invoice, or uh, it is also mentioned as immediately 30 days from the date of issue of invoice by the supplier will be considered as the earliest of this following will be considered as the time of supply of goods. The next is supply of voucher. So a supply of voucher under section 12 subsection 4, the date of issue of voucher if supply is identifiable at that point, or the date of redemption voucher in all other cases. So under this, so when we come across supply of voucher, so you will have a confusion between a voucher and a invoice. So voucher is a record where you write the details of entry passed. So the purpose of the expense, or the nature of the expense which has been incurred, and you pass an entry in your books of accounts. So it is, you will have a supporting document called as invoice attached to it. So for what invoice will have the details of all the units, what is the cost, as I showed you all the invoice, that was the invoice. Voucher is just an entry pass, like who's supposed to give, what is being sold, and when who's supposed to give, and how is it being recorded in the books of accounts, that is recording the expenses or the sales which has been made. So when supply of voucher, so when the voucher is supplied to the recipient, supply of goods if it is identifiable, that is the date of issue of voucher if the supply is identifiable at that point. Identifiable in the sense necessary component or element to pay GST are available. So if you want to pay GST, the goods should be identifiable. That is what kind of goods. Only then you will know what is the tax rate to be imposed on it. So if the supply of voucher, so if the voucher is issued, so based on the issuance of voucher the goods are supplied, then the date of issue of voucher will be considered if the supply is identifiable at that point. If the goods are not identified, that is the characteristics of the goods or the nature of the goods is not mentioned, then the date of redemption of the voucher, that is when the goods are realized, that is when the sale date of the goods are realized, then you will know what kind of goods is being sold. So then it can be considered as the time of supply. Next, in case it is not possible to determine the time of supply under the above provisions, so if we are not able to bring to a conclusion what is the time of the supply with the provisions what we have discussed till now, in a case where a periodical return has to be filed, be the date on which such return is to be filed, or in any other case be the date on which tax is paid. So if we don't know the date of supply of voucher, or the date of goods received by the recipient, or the date when the supplier has given the issue, if all the details are not known, then the date at which the return has to be filed can be considered as the time of supply. So the tax, or the date on which the tax is paid, would be considered as the time of supply. So for every tax which has been which is there, will be having a due date. So within that due date, all the transactions related to payment of GST should be filed. So that date can be considered as the time of supply if the exact date is not known by the supplier or the recipient. Next, additional value of supply of goods. The time of supply, to the extent it releases to an addition in the value of supply by way of interest, rate of a late fee or penalty for delayed payment of any consideration, shall be the date on which the supplier receives such addition in value. For example, if the goods are to be supplied, the date of issuance is known, and but the goods are not but as I've already told, when we have a GST portal, the details of the goods which has been supplied by the supplier should be updated accordingly. So whenever the GST goods are bought, it should be recorded in the portal with the GST amount what you are supposed to pay. So it is an automatic updation of the data. So by then we will know when the goods are being supplied, and based on that we will pay the GST liability of GST tax which is to be paid to the officials or the authority in charge with GST CGST Act 2017. So if we know that the tax is being paid late, or the time of supply is known, but it is not used for the calculation, or the tax is not paid according to that time of supply which is mentioned, then additional value will be imposed with the GSTs, that is interest, late fee or penalty for delay payment of any consideration shall be the date on which the supplier receives such addition in value. Or it can also, addition in value can also be considered when the date of invoice is given, and if the supplier if the recipient is paying the consideration at the crossing the due date of the invoice. The due date in the sense the date at which the money should be paid to the supplier. If the payment is made crossing the due date, then he is supposed to pay interest and penalty along penalty to the for the or any consideration shall be the date on which the supplier receives such addition in value. So he is liable to pay along with the GST tax. The fines are also being imposed. So let us solve one problem under this time of supply of goods. So determine the time of supply of goods in the following situation. So the date of issue of invoice, and date of payment is given. So in this table we have discussed the date of invoice, the date of recipient of the invoice, then what is the details we have learnt in this, I'm sorry, date of issue of invoice, then date of payment. So in this conditions we have learnt all this. So whichever is early among them will be considered as time of supply. The same thing in this problem, they are given the due date of invoice, then they have given us date of invoice, then date of payment is given. So due date of invoices, the invoice should be given within October 2017. And the date of invoice is October 10, 2017. The date of payment made for that invoice or the goods which has been bought is October 15, 2017. So among this situation, whichever is early should be considered as the time of supply, and the taxes should be paid immediately. So due date of issue of invoices October 1st, 2017, and date of invoice is October 10, 2017, and date of payment is October 15, 2017. So which is early in this case is October 1st, 2017 to be considered as time of supply. Second case, August 10, 2017 is the due date of issue of invoice. Then the date of invoice is July 15, and the date of payment is August. So in this, the earlier case is July 15. So July 15 will be considered as time of supply. Then in the third situation, July 18, 2017 is the due date of issue of invoice. Date of invoice is July 20th. Date of payment is July 20th. So in this case, the earlier situation or earlier situation in these three cases is date of issue of invoice, which is July 18, 2017 would be considered as time of supply. So in all the cases, the same thing will be followed. Now fourth situation, due date of issue of invoice is July 5th, date of invoice is July 15, then date of payment of the invoice, check received, book entry July 10th, and actual credit made at the bank is July 12th. So which is earlier? So July 5th is earlier, which is the due date of issue of invoice. Next, the fifth one, June 15, 2017 is the date of issue of invoice, and date of invoice is June 15, 2017. Then the check. So in fifth question, June 15, 2017, June 15, 2017, the date of invoice. Then date of payment, check received, book entry is June 14, 2017. Actual credit in the bank was on June 16, 2017. So among this following, which is the earliest? So the earliest is check received, where the book entry is June 14. So June 14, the earliest transaction will be considered as time of supply. Then sixth question, July 5th, 2015 is the date of issue of invoice. Then the date of invoice is July 10, 2017. Date of payment is July 1st, 2017. So as the date of payment is July 1st will be considered, whichever is earlier will be considered. So the date of payment will be considered under sixth question. Under seventh, July 10th is the date of issue of invoice. Then date of invoice uh, date of invoice is August 16th. Then date of payment is July 5th, 2017, and July 25th, 2017. So among this, which is earliest is July 5th, 2017, one part, and July 25th is the remaining part. So whichever is earlier will be considered. So July 5th will be considered for one part, and for the second part, July 10th will be considered for the remaining part, the date of payment. So that is what is mentioned here. July 5th for one part, July 10th for the remaining part. Then June 16th, which is the date of issue of invoice. So invoice is issued on June 16, 2017. Then the invoice date is June 20th, 2017. So that is nothing but the due date, June 20th, 2017. Date of payment is actual credit in bank is June 15, 2017. Entry in the books is June 17, 2015. So among this, which is early, actual credit in the bank is early, which is June 15. So June 15, 2017 will be considered. Then 9th September 6, 2017 is the invoice which is being issued by the supplier, and the date which is there in the invoice is September 10, 2017. Actual credit in the bank is September 7, 2017. Entry in the books is September 5, 2017. Among this, entry in the books is earlier. So September 5th, 17 will be considered. 2017 will be considered as time of supply. The last one, July 4th is the issue of invoice by the supplier. July 4th, and the date of invoice is July 10, and date of payment is July 1st. So the date of payment is earlier, much earlier before the issue of invoice. So July 1st will be considered as time of supply. So next is we have under section section 13, which is time of supply of services. In initial slide, I explained all time of supply is divided into three, which is section 2 and time of supply of goods, where we discussed a chart. Then we have solved a problem under it. Then we are going to discuss section 13, time of supply of services. So this chart is also similar to time of supply of goods. So where we have forward charge, reverse charge, supply of voucher and other cases, where we will be considering time of supply, whichever is early among these cases. So now you would have got confused. What is forward charge and reverse charge? So forward charge is nothing but where the tax is paid by the supplier. That is, for example, when I sell goods to the customer buys the goods and I will give invoice to them. So in that invoice, as you looked into the invoice, so invoice looks like this. So here I will mention the GST what they are supposed to pay, the taxable value, that is the goods value, and total I will charge and I will collect from the buyer. So the seller is ABC, the buyer is XYZ. So XYZ will pay the full which is mentioned here. It is 3,60,150. This is forward charges, where the supplier will collect the GST and pay it to the government officials. So reverse charges is where the receiver, that is the receiver of the goods or services, will pay the GST. So how it works is, the supplier, when he supplying goods, he will not collect GST from the receiver. He will only collect the amount which is exactly charged. For example, the goods worth is 3,43,000 and the GST total up comes to 3,60,000. When it is reverse charge, the buyer will bear the GST, or he will be liable to pay the GST to the government. So he will receive only, the supplier will receive only 3,43,000 from the buyer, and the remaining, the GST will be paid by the buyer itself. So when the buyer pays the GST for the service which has been received by him is called as reverse charge. When the supplier collects the GST and pays it to the government, then it is called forward charge. So I hope you understood what is reverse charge and forward charge. So this format is similar to time of supply of service, and time of supply of goods is similar. So but let us go through between the forward charge, reverse charge. There is little variation, that is the number of days of issue of invoice. Apart from that, everything is similar. So under forward charge, under section 13 subsection 2, when invoice is issued under section 31 subsection 2, earliest of the following will be considered, that is the date of issue of invoice or the date of receipt of payment. Whichever is received earlier will be considered as the time of supply. When invoice is not issued, earliest of the following will be considered, the date of provision of services, that is where provision of the services, that is this expenses will be recorded in the books of accounts, then that date will be considered, or the date of receipt of payment, or the date at which the payment is received will be collected when in case invoice is not issued. Then under reverse charge, earliest of the following will be considered, the date of payment as entered in the books of accounts of the recipient, or the date on which payment is debited in his bank account, whichever is earlier. So the date on which in the books of accounts they have made that the payment is made, that date would be considered that is in the books of the recipient, and the date at which the amount is, that is the tax, the supplier's amount, that goods amount is being debited from the receiver's account to the supplier's account. When that transaction is happened, that date will be considered, whichever early is considered, or the date immediately following 60 days from the date of issue of invoice, or if that is not happening, then immediately following 60 days from the date of invoice will be considered as the time of supply under reverse charges. Now the supply of voucher and other cases will be similar to time of supply of goods. So now let us look into one problem under time of supply of services. So here, determine the time of supply of services in the following independent cases. So serial number, date of completion of services. As you all know, if the services is completed, the payment for the services will be received. So date of completion of services, date of invoice, date of on which payment is received. So services will be rendered first. That is, the provision for the services will be created. So after the service is rendered, the invoice will be sent for the service what is rendered, and the receipt, then the amount will be collected. So the service date will be earlier compared to the invoice date. When it is goods, invoices will be sent, then goods will be delivered. But when it comes to services, services will be delivered first. That is date of completion of services. After the service is delivered, what is the amount and what kind of service is delivered, based on that invoices will be issued. So if you look into this, the completion of service date will be earlier there than the date of invoice. So now, under the first circumstances or situation, date of completion of services is on 16th July 2017. Date of invoice is 11th August. The date on which payment is received is 26th August. So which is early in these circumstances will be considered. So, with the solution as it states, as per section 13 of CGST and STSU to GST Act 2017, in case the invoice is issued within the prescribed period of 30 days from the date of completion of provision of services, the time of supply is date of invoice, date of receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. However, in case the invoice is not issued within 30 days of completion of the provision of services, the time of supply is the date of completion of provision of services, date of receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. So these 2 points will be considered. If invoice is issued within 30 days from the date of completion of services, then invoice date or receipt of payment date will be considered, whichever is earlier. If invoice is not issued, then the time of supply will be the date of completion of services, provision of services, or date of receipt of payment, whichever earlier will be considered. Further advances received are taxable at the time when such advances are received. So before the services, there are certain advances which has been received. That advances will be taxable at the time when the advances are received. So now accordingly the time of supply in the given cases is as follows. So we will calculate the time of supply under the circumstances. So the date of provision of services as per the question is 16/7/2017. Then the date of invoice is 11/8/2017. Date on which payment is received is 26/8/2017. So point of taxation. So now the date of provision of services which is being rendered is 1 July. Then the date of invoice which is received is within 30 days. So the date of invoice or the date of payment, whichever is earlier among this, will be considered. So the date of invoice will be considered. This situation is nothing but the first situation which is explained under this. So the invoice is issued within 30 days. Then among these two, whichever is earlier. So in these circumstances, the date of completion of services within 30 days, that is before 16th of August, the invoice is being received. So we need to be considering date of invoice or date on which payment is received, which is earlier among this will be considered. So earlier among this is date of invoice. So we will be taking 11th August 2016. Next, date of provision of services is 16/7. Then date of invoice is 11th August. Then date on which payment is received is 1st August. In this case, the invoice date of invoice which is received is within 30 days, and the date of payment is received on 1st August 2017. So in this case, you need to look into date of invoice and the payment received, which is earlier. So date of payment is earlier, so you will be taking 1st August 2016. So when it is service, you need to look into date of invoice and the receipt of payment. If the invoice is not given, then date of provision of services, that is, if the invoice is not given within 30 days, then date of provision and date of payment will be considered to look whichever is early among it. Now the third one, 16 July 2017 is the provision of services. 11th August is the date of invoice. Part payment on 1st 8 2017, and the remaining on 26th 8 2017. So For the first payment, the supply date will be on 1st August 2017, and for the second payment will be the date of invoice, whichever is the next earlier event will be considered as the time of supply. So 11th August 2017 for the remaining amount. Next, the fourth circumstances. On 16 July 2017, the service was rendered. The date of invoice is on 11th August. Then the date of payment, part payment, 12th July was one payment and 15th July was the other payment. So now if you look into this, the date of payment is earlier than the date of invoice. So both the dates, that is 12th July 2017 and 15th July 2017, will be considered as the time of supply. So whichever is early under this circumstances, so you need to know the provisions what is being created. Please go through this video and the pictures which is shown in this slide for you to understand clearly. So thank you everyone. The next concept what we are going to study is time of supply in case of change in rate of tax, section 14. So in the initial page of the slide, what I uh, wanted to explain is section 12, section 13, which I have explained section 12 and 13, that is in respect of goods and services. Now section 14 is when there is change in rate of tax, any supply is made, how is that supply, or where, what, at what rate and what time will be decided for that supply. So the GST liability which is to be payable, the time to pay the GST will be decided, will be explained. So thank you everyone. We will look into the next video in your upcoming videos which has been sent to you all.